composers that really defy any sort of label or category. The one next to me is exactly that. We're looking at music that is influenced by jazz, avant-garde, classical, South Indian classical music. He is the director of jazz at Princeton University. I'm sitting here with Rudresh Mahanthappa. Welcome to the Ojai broadcast.
Thank you for having me. Nice to be here.
Yeah, so happy to have you. So let's just talk about first your studies, ways that led you to have all these influences in your music.
Sure. Why don't you give me a start?
Well, let's start with Berkeley, DePaul, and then traveling to India on the Guggenheim Fellowship.
Well, I think a lot of my perspective was actually shaped by my very first saxophone teacher, who I studied with from 4th grade until I went to college. And he's a very interesting guy. His name is Mark Harris, great saxophonist, great reed player. This is in the Boulder, Denver, Colorado area. And he just had a very open perspective about what music is and what music can be. And, we really avoided a lot of labels, This is at a time when a music teacher actually came to your house, and he would always bring, 2 or 3 LPs, and there would be a wide variety. It might be something like Stravinsky, Rite of Spring, in fact, and Yes, and Sidney Bechet, and the next week it might be Ornette Coleman and Sonny Stitt and The Police, So I was listening to all these things at the same time with this sense that music was a larger continuum, and that, it wasn't until I went to college that I really heard expressions like terms like hard bop and avant-garde, and I always thought that was very strange. As a saxophonist, Charlie Parker was great, John Coltrane was great, Ornette Coleman was great. All these people were playing great. The idea of genre and judging genres, something as correct or incorrect, or there was music that was played well with a mission. Mm-hmm. And that's what was really important. So that was instilled in me at a very young age. And so I was able to carry that energy through a lot of my education, regardless of what the educating forces were telling me, So, and he always emphasized having a unique voice and a unique personality, and the importance of learning any tradition in which you engage, but maintaining your sense of having a unique voice through all of that. So I think he's the biggest force in everything I do. And, I still hear, he's one of my best friends. He was a groomsman at my wedding,
Wow.
But I still hear, a lot of his voice in my head even today. So
Vijay mentioned in the program notes of the whole festival, and I've been talking to a lot of the other artists who come in here about his emphasis on getting rid of the word genre and replacing it with the word community.
Right.
And this is something that speaks to you, obviously.
Sure, definitely. I think that's a very high ideal and and a worthy mission. I think as human beings, we like genre. We like categorizing things, and I think that's something that we do day to day. So, I don't think we can actually get rid of the word genre, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to think along those lines. I just think we have to see the larger picture, even more, the macrocosm and microcosm at the same time. I think that's what makes the world go round, really.
Absolutely. Can you talk a little bit about your studies in India?
Well, my studies in India were very informal. The way I learned a lot of, the concepts of Indian classical music were the same way I learned jazz, which was from albums. Just trying to learn by ear and trying to listen as much as possible. It's that same old thing. If there's anything that you really want to learn, you just surround yourself with it, right? So, so that was never that formal sort of study where, you go live with a guru and sing one raga for 2 years and fetch them tea and make them lunch. And I think I'm too pig-headed to do that, and I also am interested in too many things to have dedicated that time, to dedicate 10 or 20 years of my life to that. So, but fortunately I had, really nice relationships already going. I worked with this great South Indian Carnatic saxophonist named Khatri Gopalnath, and, hearing him on recording when I was in college was really an eye-opener, because it was somebody playing Carnatic music on my instrument. So I could actually get into the technicalities of how to do these things on the saxophone, whereas I couldn't really figure that out listening to the vocalists or the flute players or the string players. So my study was really just like hanging out with him every day for a month, and we'd work on a different concept or a different raga every day, and we'd work all morning and we'd eat lunch, and then he would take a nap and I would keep working. We did that for we did that for a month. So that was really fun. And then I did a very similar thing with a great South Indian percussionist in Bangalore as well. And the idea was to take all that information and have the rest of my life to work on it, as opposed to spending the rest of my life in India working on it.
And which, by going through all of your albums and everything you've done, it's so clearly there. Like, you're an amalgam of of everything you've done, which is incredible.
Well, thank you. I think it's it's always there. I mean, even when and it's funny to see the kind of the progress when I think I think of like me and Vijay together. I mean, a lot of this. We worked on a lot of these things together. We listened to a lot of music together. We've been playing together for 22 years now. So
great, which is my next question, is the very beginning of you and Vijay. How did you first connect? And the first album, Architecture, is that correct?
Yes, that was right. That I guess I did play on that. Did I play on that? Yeah, I guess I did play on that. God, it seems like so long ago. I feel very old these days. Well, Steve Coleman actually introduced us. So Steve was teaching. Steve Coleman, if the viewers don't know,
to
is
Steve
a
Coleman
great...
through this festival.
Absolutely, yeah. Steve Coleman looms large, I should say. He was teaching at the Stanford Jazz Workshop. This is like the summer of '94, and at that time, Steve was not as much of a transmitter of information, I'll say, instead of educator. He wasn't really talking about his stuff, his conceptual stuff that much. It was almost like it was a secret. So when I found out that he was teaching at Stanford for the summer workshop, I made sure that I was there. And that whole week he was talking about different people that he was playing with. He connected with a lot of people in the Bay Area. And he kept talking about someone named Vijay. And finally I was like, is his name Vijay? He said, yeah. I said, is he Indian? He said, yeah. And so he introduced us, and it was very flattering because Vijay had just played on an album. I mean, he had just played on an album of Vijay's, his first album, Memorabilia. And he said, if I can't make your gigs, you should definitely call this guy, which was a very nice endorsement, So, and we've been playing together ever since. We kept in touch that year, and Vijay found us a gig at this really great South Asian Arts and Activism Festival in Toronto called Desh Pardesh, which doesn't exist anymore. But he got us a gig there, and we'd never really played together, so we got there like 3 or 4 days in advance and rehearsed like crazy. And but beyond just playing music, we had so much in common as far as our upbringing in America, from just dealing with cultural differences, just and going to school, and different sorts of discrimination or racism, but also on a lighter side, our parents mispronouncing the same words, and just, I almost think that the music we've made is a byproduct of our experience just hanging out together, it's almost secondary to the whole picture, it's like he's a cousin or a brother or something, so.
That's awesome. So, you guys have made so many albums together. I have here Panoptic Modes, In What Language, Blood Sutra, Reimagining. Is there any thoughts on hearing all those, your oeuvre said back to you, and what does it all mean?
Well, those are all his albums, and then he played on several of my albums too. And I think that there are a lot of similarities in the way we've thought about music, but the way we actually construct music is quite different. So that's always. That's been great, to just kind of see all our different perspectives on what we do and how they've evolved over 20 years now. So, yeah, it's been a wild ride. I think after all that, I think our strongest voice is still playing duo and
Raw Materials.
Exactly, and that's how we started.
Not just Raw Materials, but the album called Raw Materials.
And that's what the duo is called too. We call ourselves Raw Materials.
And so, can you talk about it a little bit? The album and the duo.
Well, that's how we started. That first gig we got in Toronto was for the duo, and I think a lot of it came out of economics at first because we couldn't afford to keep flying each other around and have a band, but we developed this way of playing duo that I think is unlike a lot of the ways that jazz duo exists, and in the way we interact and the way we accompany each other. It's like it's very complete, you know. And at this point, there's very little conversation that has to happen. I mean, we just play, and there's all this music that we've both written. So, you know, we at this point we're only playing duo like once or twice a year, but it's every time we play, it's like we just played yesterday.
You just do.
Yeah, like it hasn't been that long, you know. Like it's really like we just played a gig last week, even though it could have been a year and a half ago. So
Yeah, you know, listening to the album, going through it, my sense of it was, as a listener, I really submitted to the music because everything just felt like it just flowed and was very natural, and it didn't ask me to like think too hard about it, but asked me just to listen.
Right. Yeah, I think, you know, it has that energy, and I think that energy comes out of the fact that we've just been playing together so long. There's this very kind of, it's almost like when we play, we're inviting someone into our, you know, our living room or something. It's not this, you know, there's no fourth wall to break down, really.
So you mentioned like your way of like your voice up as a composer and his voice, and when you guys are together, how does that become something? Your separates.
Wow. I don't know how to describe that. I mean, I think we always find ways of highlighting what the other person does, for sure. But I think the nature of our differences comes a lot from the instruments that we play, you know. And even when we go back and look at what we focused on when we were listening to all this Indian music together, I mean, I think initially he was more intrigued by, you know, the drummers, by a lot of the rhythmic stuff, just by nature of playing the piano and his kind of Thelonious Monk-like approach that really has this sense of drums behind it. Whereas for me, it was very melodic. It was the singers and the flute players and the violinists and trying to emulate that. And I think we were able to kind of show each other how that works in a lot of different ways and put all these ideas together.
Really cool. And so he's also played with you in your quartet, the Rudresh Mahanthappa Quartet.
Right. It's a brilliant name, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
He played on a few albums. He played on Blackwater and Mother Tongue and Codebook and yeah, and that was great. I mean, I think eventually we just got so busy doing our own things and our interests kind of shifted, and you know, he does a lot of stuff with his trio, and there's something very special about the piano trio that it functions as a kind of a single organism that once you throw a horn player in there, you've destroyed that. So I can definitely see. And I was more interested in playing with guitarists because I really needed that sense of microtonality, or, you know, this kind of pitch bending that doesn't happen on the piano to make the music I was making, especially my collaborations with Indian musicians and gamak and, you know, other things that came after. So, you know, but you know, we always come back to, you know, our duo scenario. What's exciting for me with the show tomorrow is that we're actually playing two tunes from my forthcoming album that I kind of rearranged for this scenario. So that'll be fun because you know, those haven't really been played in public very much, only once or twice. So
cool.
So it'll be really fun to have Vijay and Aruna and Sacre on board for those. The actual album is with my Indo-Pak Coalition trio with Dan Weiss on tabla and Reza Bassi on guitar. So it's just funny and fun to give it some other energy so early on with, you know, with a great set of different musicians.
Absolutely. You briefly mentioned just now gamak. Could you talk about that album? Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I mean, gamaka is the word for rhythmic ornamentation in both North and South Indian music, and I think, you know, I think of ornamentation as this large kind of humanizing factor in music. You know, it's
in what way?
Oh, well, I think it's what gives melody life. It's what gives. I think a lot of the great emotion comes from the way we personalize and inflect a particular melody, and that's.
I like that.
You know, that's whether it's blues or Beyonce or you know, really great, you know, country musicians or yodelers or the way it exists in Indian music and East Asian music and African music. So I kind of wanted to look at how ornamentation occurs across the world and create music that was based on that. So, you know, there is this kind of South Asian inflection to the music, but a lot of it sounds, you know, some of it sounds very poppy, some of it's coming from, you know, Indonesian gamelan, and it's coming from a lot of different sources all at once, and but just trying to see how we bring melody to life.
That's really cool. And a good segue to your most recent album, Bird Calls.
Right. So Bird, Charlie Parker was a huge influence for me, and is always someone I go back to when I feel uninspired, or if I feel inspired, whatever, just to feel happy. I think they're, you can put Charlie Parker playing "I'm in the Mood for Love" on any day, and it'll make your day better. But I wanted to somehow, pay tribute to what we've learned from him. I mean, so much modern music would not exist without Charlie Parker. So, and just to think about what he gave, the gifts he gave us without actually imitating imitating him. I mean, there've been hundreds and thousands of Charlie Parker impersonators, and I think the best way we show reverence is not to imitate somebody and play their repertoire. It's to show what we learned from that. So each tune on the album is actually based on a snippet of something he either played as an improviser or wrote as a composer.
So tomorrow at 1 p.m., we're going to hear the concert Confluence.
Right.
With you, Zakir Hussain on the tabla, Aruna Sairam, Vijay. Tell us about this concert. You briefly touched on it a little bit. What can we expect?
I think you can expect a lot of magic. I mean, I
like that. That's a high.
There's
good promo.
Yeah. There's sounds like an NBC plug or something like that. The magic of Thursday nights, So, but what's always interesting is when you take people that are coming from similar mindsets or similar experiences, but different perspectives on how they put music together and their performance practice. So, I think Aruna, Zakir, me, and Vijay, I mean, we're coming from very similar places, but we've had, varied experiences. And so to have this very kind of collective construct with where we've each contributed, compositions, and, we're kind of learning from each other in real time. And it also has that kind of freshness of, where you have musicians that are all at a very high level, but maybe something that's not very rigid, that hasn't been rehearsed a ton of times. We rehearsed once in New York and twice here in Ojai, and I think it sounds very strong and very spontaneous. I think I'm very excited about it.
Well, that is sure to be fantastic. Thank you so much
for
stopping in with us. Rudresh Mahanthappa, tomorrow, 1 p.m., playing a concert that is magic, and it's going to be full of magic.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much.
Great to talk to you.
Yeah. So we are going to now get ready for tonight's concert. It's going to be a very, very, very exciting show. And that includes performances, the world premiere of Courtney Bryan's Yet Unheard, as well as the Printemps Quartet returning to us with Art of Fugue and Vijay Iyer's Time, Place, and Action. I'd like to welcome back to the broadcast my co-host, Steve Smith.
Thank you very much.
It's been great so far. It's been so much fun.
It's been extraordinary. It's been an extraordinary experience talking to everybody on the internet and interacting with everybody who's here in person. And of course, what phenomenal music that we've heard today. I mean, starting at 9 a.m. with a daybreak concert by Nicole Mitchell, a former president of the AACM and a flutist and composer and ensemble leader, whose own new record, by the way, is really, really radically good, and you should check it out on Bandcamp right away. End of plug. Then the Gazebo concert shortly thereafter, yes, which was two pieces by the New York composer Mario Diaz de Leon, who has worked very, very closely with the members of International Contemporary Ensemble over the years. So we heard a small ensemble piece that featured Claire Chase, Josh Rubin, and Rebecca Heller, and then a brand new piece that was just bassoon and electronics by Rebecca Heller, and just an extraordinary little event. And those are the free things that just are, so...
But what's so cool about those pop-up concerts, and especially Mario's music, this year with this idea of getting rid of genre and these cross-genre artists, Mario's a great example, also thrive in the electronic world, and you hear that in his music.
Sure, he's very, very deeply steeped in electronic music. He has a solo, usually solo keyboards project, but he also comes out of a sort of extreme heavy heavy metal background, and so sometimes he'll pull out the electric guitar and completely shred. I heard him do it on stage with ICE members in Chicago once at the Empty Bottle, and it was kind of extraordinary.
Awesome. After that, we had the afternoon concert, right?
Right, the afternoon concert, which was the Brentano Quartet. And, talk about things sounding different, fresh, and new out of context. We've been listening to so much new music and so much fresh inspiration. Hearing Mozart played in the middle of that, you just hear it new. You hear it fresh.
Wild.
Your ears are completely retuned. And you said that this particular quartet, it's the Dissonance Quartet?
Yes, the Chromatic Quartet.
Chromatic Quartet, there we go.
Or Dissonance, both of them.
There you go.
But in this context, it sounded like something that was not dissonant whatsoever.
That's exactly right. And of course, the Brentanos followed that with a piece by György Kurtag, which were just these pithy little miniatures, just sketches and evocations and bits of light and bits of character. Really brilliant little packets of musical information. And then at the end of that, we heard a Mozart-related piece by 2017 music director Vijay Iyer. And talk a little bit about this Fragments project.
Yeah, this piece is so cool. Brentano, a few years back, commissioned all these composers to complete fragments of existing pieces by older composers. Composers like Shostakovich. Stephen Harkey wrote the end of his Shostakovich piece. Then we had Bach. Sofia Gubaidulina finished a Bach work. And then you have Vijay Iyer finishing a Mozart fragment.
What incredible company to be in. I mean, that's exalted company.
And if you tune in for that concert, what you really heard was a minute and 20 of Mozart, and then about 5 minutes and 30 of Vijay Iyer, and it was just awesome and so cool. And it was almost as if the Mozart got stuck for a second and kept looping.
Exactly.
And then it went away.
And just so many sort of flamboyant gestures. What I kept thinking actually while listening to that piece is, my God, Vijay had a lot of fun writing this piece. He must have done.
Yes.
So coming up this evening, we have another program in which a new piece refers directly to an older piece. This idea of companion pieces has really been sort of a thing that's in the world, in the classical music world lately, where a contemporary composer will be asked to write a piece that specifically makes some kind of structural or thematic reference to an older piece. And so in this case, the older piece is, quite frankly, still revolutionary, from 1913, Igor Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, but in kind of a different guise.
Yes, we're seeing it this time as a new arrangement, a de-orchestration in a way.
Correct.
By Cliff Colnot, a conductor from DePaul University, a master arranger, has worked previously with ICE as well as with the Chicago Symphony. And for me, what I'm most excited about is two things, is seeing if he takes some of these iconic Stravinsky colors and tries to translate them or completely reinterpret it. And a little bit of spoiler is I know there's some reinterpretation because I've been hearing all day long Stravinsky Rite of Spring excerpts on the wrong instrument.
I was hearing something just a little bit earlier on Glockenspiel, and I was like, really? Oh, well.
I heard the iconic trumpet call on the violin, and I was like, great.
See, there you have it. So again, even when you're getting something that is as seminal a piece as that, you're still getting a new spin, a new interpretation, a new way to look at music that's very familiar. And then with Radhe, which we'll talk about a little bit more in greater detail, but the short version is that it goes along with a beautiful, beautiful film by Prashant Bhargava, who is a very talented filmmaker and a good friend of Vijay's, who tragically passed away very young just 2 years ago. So tonight's performance is being done in his memory. The film and the piece of music were composed to commemorate the centenary of the Rite of Spring. And so the skeleton of the piece, in a certain way, actually is the Rite of Spring.
Right, so you have, the two large kind of big movements, and within that, 6 smaller movements.
Right.
Which is really cool, and that mirrors the original.
And the voicings, the bassoon that starts the Stravinsky turns up somewhere near the middle of Vijay's piece. But it's not merely a matter of evocation. It's a case where Bhargava actually, when he made his film, he used a specific recording. It's the LSO recording of the Rite of Spring on the Naxos record label. So a specific recording of the Rite of Spring. He used it as his scratch track.
I did not know that.
He cut the film to that recording and then took the recording away and gave it to Vijay to reconceive what music would flow in.
Does that make it harder or easier on Vijay?
Well, probably both in some ways. I mean, you've got certain parameters where you have to hit this much time. But on the other hand, I would think it would be very freeing to sort of just erase it all and say, what can I do with this empty vessel now?
It's true, but I think if you know the piece, which everyone knows right as spring,
of course.
when you get to moments like, rah, 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 I mean, it's hard not to hear that in the video.
Can you do that again?
Sorry, I wasn't right the accents weren't right.
No, that was exactly perfect. And then if that were not enough, that's our main concert this evening, but we also have a late night concert tonight in which the Brentano Quartet returns with Bach's venerable Art of Fugue. We're going to have actually a little prelude to that. We're going to have Amazing Grace, and then the Art of Fugue. Then we're going to go into another Vijay Iyer piece, which is titled Time, Place, Action.
Yes. This concert, the theme of today and last night with Jennifer Coe is this old and new, and where do those intersect and where do those lines meet? And with the Art of Fugue, you have Bach, the last piece he wrote, he actually never finished it. Is that correct?
That's right.
And it's an obsession with a single theme. And how many ways can you take this theme and flip it upside down, right side up, backwards, in all different ways and explore it? Followed by Vijay Iyer's Time, Place, Action, which has him on the piano, Brentano Quartet in front of him. And in my opinion, having listened to the piece, I imagine as the same exploration of this intersection between improvised music and composed music, and how many ways can Vijay take it, flip it around, look at it upside down on its head, and what can he do with that?
And once again, it's fascinating to note for anybody who might not have heard this a couple of times already, or even if you have, for all that Vijay's public persona is that of a jazz pianist and a very, very versatile and fine one, the fact of the matter is that he originally trained in classical violin, so that is his native idiom. He talked about it a few days ago and said, that it's not very easy for him to go back to playing on a very professional level. He played the Bach double concerto with his daughter,
good.
and she outplayed him. She said. So, but nevertheless, it is in his bloodstream. It's in his DNA, and he's a self-taught pianist. So again, we're hearing an intermeshing of disciplines, of practices, of idioms. We're not going to use the word genre because that is verboten now. But again, and the one other thing to know about this piece that he composed is that it is dedicated to the memory of the revolutionary poet Amiri Baraka. So there's one more piece on the program this evening, Helga Davis as the soloist with a large ensemble, just a beautiful, lush orchestra in music by Courtney Bryan.
Yes. So yesterday, if you were on the broadcast, I interviewed Courtney Bryan and Sharon Strange. Sharon Strange is the poet who wrote the text. And then today, I interviewed Helga Davis on this piece. And I don't want to say too much about it, but just that it tells the story of Sandra Bland, who died in police custody after a routine traffic stop almost 2 years ago. And the piece is just trying to create awareness on that story, tell her story, and then challenge you to just take it in and take it to the world with you.
Well, and here again, this is emblematic of one more strand, yet another strand of this festival. We've talked about the intersection of generations. We've talked about the permeability of different communities who come from different practices, whether it be jazz or Carnatic music or conventional Western classical music. Here again is an intersection between classical music or art music or composed music, whatever term you want to use, with the outside world, the world that we actually live in, the fact that artists live in this world too, and that many of them, increasingly, are choosing to reflect something of that world in the very pieces that they create. So we've seen this already a couple of times. We've seen this in Vijay Iyer's new violin concerto, Trouble, which, the title refers both to the kind of good trouble that Representative John Lewis so frequently refers to, but also trouble in the sense of feeling really bothered by the election, perhaps, or whatever. So, that was one of the first iterations of that kind of awareness of the real world. And then, of course, when we saw George Lewis's opera afterward, that dealt with the real, actual genesis of Chicago's Association for the Advancement of Creative Music. But it also dealt with issues of civil rights. It dealt with issues of economic disparity, of perception of African Americans in 1960s Paris, so many other things besides just the notes on the page. So that's yet another theme that's been played out through this pretty revolutionary festival.
And we've been talking about, this pulling away from genre, and having talked to all the creators of tonight's world premiere on the 10:30 p.m. concert, what I'm gathering is that most of these artists brought to this festival are just trying to represent themselves in the best way possible, and all these artists come from so many different places, ethnically and training-wise and instrumentally. I mean, we had Jen Chu on yesterday, and she literally played a dozen instruments in her show yesterday morning.
And how many languages?
Oh, 7 languages.
7 languages.
Yeah, and so it's just artists, this whole festival, trying to represent themselves as best as they can.
Right. By the way, if you get desperately jealous of any of these programs that we mentioned as having already happened, you should know that everything that gets done here is not only being live streamed, but it's going to be archived online, so you will be able to go back and see some of these delectable programs that you may have missed. So, definitely take full advantage. It's such a generous offering, and I know I've gone back numerous times and listened to the big piece of Tyshawn's that was at last year's program, and it's a marvelous thing, a marvelous resource.
Absolutely. As you can hear, the bells are going off. We're getting very close, and this is a crowded concert. The lawn behind me is jam-packed.
Right.
And there's lots of people, as you can see behind me, going to the concert hall. So tonight's concert, we're looking and at least starting off with this old meets new, and we heard that last night on the late night show with Jennifer Koh's program Bach and Beyond.
That's exactly right, where she started with the great and very familiar Partita in D minor with the world famous and colossal and moving chaconne, and then going straight into new music and very new music that in some way drew upon what Bach had done, not just in terms of music for a solo instrument, but as you said, the Missy Mazzoli's piece started on the final chord of the Bach, and then you mentioned both the Barrio piece and the Esa-Pekka Salonen piece on the program were in the form of chaconnes, was it?
Yes, that's correct. And so just trying to take so the audience takes in the Bach, takes in the chaconne, and then here's kind of 3 modern interpretations of it, and it's so cool to hear that thread drawn through music.
Right.
And tonight we're going to hear the same thing, as we've mentioned, with the Bach Art of Fugue, and then Vijay Iyer's Time, Place, Action. Now, I was backstage earlier on during all the sound checking and talked to Brentano, and they had mentioned how difficult Vijay's piece is and how it really challenged them as more classically oriented musicians to branch out from what they're used to.
Now, are they actually compelled to do a fair amount of improvisation in this piece, or?
I feel like in Vijay's music, it always asks for decisions to be made on the fly.
Decisions. That's the perfect term, actually.
You will definitely hear in that piece Vijay straight up improvise while Brentano does their thing, but I'm so sure that they are also making in-the-moment decisions.
Well, and that's a really, really great way to describe it, actually, because, as I recall, Vijay said just a couple of days ago in one of the public speeches, we're all improvisers. We actually all improvise every day. If you walk down the street, you're making choices. If you drive a car, you're making choices. So the kind of having to think spontaneously, think on your toes, make decisions in the moment, and sort of deal what you're taking in and then turn that around somehow is something that all of us do every day. But then being asked to do it on stage in front of people, it's a little bit more pressured, I would say.
Yes, and I was corrected today by Helga Davis in talking about improvisation and talking about making up music, and this is not being made up. This is being composed on the spot very thoughtfully. And I think that is 100% true. And when you're seeing them up there making up music, they're really just reacting to what they're hearing and creating some more.
Spontaneous composition, precisely.
Which we heard today on the conduction.
Well, that's exactly right. And the conduction is sort of an extreme version of that, and also a really kind of a utopian vision of what democracy could look like. The conduction was led by Tyshawn Sorey. It's a term that he took over from the late great Butch Morris, who was a composer, a cornetist, a band leader, an idealist and a conceptualist who He passed away in 2013, but he was known for, and in fact trademarked, the term conduction, which literally means conducted improvisation. And Butch had a gift for just knowing what kinds of people would be open to and amenable to working together in that way, basically flying without a net. So he would have metal guitarists and funk players and free jazz players and classical players. He could bring them all together, and with a system of hand signals and signs and gestures, he could make music happen right there on the fly. And it impressed upon Tyshawn, who first did it at the Bowery Poetry Club in 2002, that music is information that's just trading hands in the moment, and that anybody can do it at any time. So it really was a remarkable experience for him, and especially since Butch died several years ago, Tyshawn has now become sort of the leading exponent of that. And what's exhilarating is hearing an ensemble that we normally hear in fairly, maybe more rigorously, maybe less rigorously, but mostly notated music like the International Contemporary Ensemble really turned loose to create music spontaneously on the fly. I heard the piece rehearsed twice, once when I literally first arrived in Ojai, and then once in the morning, and then we heard the performance, and none of those pieces sounded anything alike, but they were all equally valid views.
Absolutely. And there was a number of moments in the piece where I got out of my chair and ran to a monitor to check how they were making that sound.
Right.
And specifically, it was the percussionist. I had to know how he was doing what he was doing.
Right, exactly.
It was so incredible.
Though there was a fair amount of that from pianist Corey
That's
Smythe
true.
as well.
I think they were together making these amazing noises. And to get me out of my chair right into a monitor, it takes a lot. And that's so exciting for me. I can't express to you.
I saw you do that. It was really, it was very, very spontaneous and genuine reaction.
So we're about 2 minutes away right now, and I've never actually quite seen this crowd before. I was walking by the box office earlier on, and they were saying that it was sold out, actually. And they were only selling lawn seats, which is behind you, and that is absolutely packed. Maybe we can give the listeners a little bit rundown what they're going to hear before the show starts right now. The Radhe and the Stravinsky.
Well, the Stravinsky is up first, and of course, again, it's an iconic piece, The Rite of Spring, but one that we are going to be hearing in an all-new way. And remember, this is the piece that caused riots in Paris when it was premiered in 1913, although the contemporary thinking is that it's really not quite so much about the music, because, in fact, people were hooting and hollering so much at the costuming and at the choreography that nobody actually heard that much of the music. That's supposedly the story. The thing is, it was really, really radically difficult music at the time. It's still very challenging, but it's a kind of music that now, every conservatory student knows how to play The Rite of Spring. I've heard amazing youth orchestras play it. I've heard piano versions. I've heard a jazz trio version. And now we're going to hear this reduced, reconceptualized version by Cliff Colnot, performed by the International Contemporary Ensemble, as conducted by Steve Schick. And that's the first half of our program tonight. So now it's time to head down to the stage. Enjoy. Wow, that was just absolutely extraordinary. We're here at the Ojai festivals, and we've just heard Igor Stravinsky's epic 1913 ballet, The Rite of Spring, as reduced in size by Cliff Colnot and not reduced an ounce in impact, I would say. I mean, I was hearing new things, fresh things. There were parts of it that sounded absolutely jaunty, and I happened to pass by Vijay Iyer backstage, our music director this year, and he said that it even reminded him a little bit in some parts of folk music, and certainly that seems absolutely applicable to the roots of this particular piece. So what an extraordinary performance by the International Contemporary Ensemble and conductor Steve Schick. I'm Steve Smith, the Director of Publications for National Sawdust in Brooklyn. With me is composer and pianist Thomas Kotcheff. What did you think of that?
You know, main thought I was having the whole time was, wow, this piece holds up. Like, you can put in any context and it holds up. And it was awesome. I mean, like, some parts I was just taken aback by Cliff's reduction and how he changed it. I was like, ooh, that's cool. I was actually almost like a kid in a candy shop with it. And then some parts I was like, don't miss the orchestra at all. This version's just as good. I think it's just really cool for me. And I was giddy the whole time. I was in the back there dancing away. I mean, literally dancing. It was
not doing Nijinsky Diaghilev moves.
I had a couple of my.
Well, you tripped over a wire, perhaps.
No, it was just awesome, and and those players up there, the best in the world. It was just phenomenal. I mean, I can't explain how much fun that was for me as a listener.
It was really quite extraordinary. It was an exhilarating new view of a familiar and classic piece, which is sort of a theme, one of many themes that's running through this year's Ojai Music Festival. Older pieces in dialogue, quite literally, with newer pieces. And that's what we're looking at tonight with tonight's pairing, which is Radhe Radhe, Rites of Holi, which is composed by Vijay Iyer, again, this year's music director of the Ojai Music Festival. It involves Vijay and his trio, and it involves the same players that we just heard, and it involves a film by Prashant Bhargava, who is going to be... The film is going to be screened during the performance. It's really quite extraordinary how it came about, and in fact, the film and music pairing actually was a centenary response to the Rite of Spring. It was quite intentionally meant to be in dialogue with that piece, and it was. The original film was made, Bhargava made his film using an actual recording of the Rite of Spring as his scratch track. So the sort of cadences and structural pace of the film is based on the music that we just heard, and then that was wiped away, and new music by Vijay Iyer was created to go with this particular film.
Yeah, I cannot wait to hear this, and I can't wait to hear what Vijay did with it.
Right, it's going to be quite extraordinary, and that's coming up at the end of this intermission.
So it looks like we have an interview right now for you from our director.
Sean Griffin, director
Yes.
of Afterward, George Lewis's opera, which was on stage last night.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm having a lot of trouble seeing through the glare. So, Sean, we are going to talk a little bit about Afterward. And Afterward, for those of you who didn't have a chance to see it, that was George Lewis's opera based literally on the afterword of his colossal 728-page treatise on the history and origin of the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians. The book is titled A Power Stronger Than Itself, and where most of the book is in a very sort of fanciful kind of, I'm sorry, let me reverse myself. I kind of got that backwards there. Most of it is kind of in a very rigorous and scholarly kind of mode. George Lewis did hundreds of interviews writing this epic history, and it's the definitive history of the organization, which is an organization that revolutionized not just American music, but cultural life, economics, politics, you name it. A lot of what we've been seeing here at this festival is a direct result of what happened with the AACM. And then at the end of the book, George wrote in a more sort of lyrical and whimsical is not really the right word for it, but you know what I mean. It's a more felt thing, and he's extracting testimony from the people who have been quoted throughout the book, but using it in a very different way. And now the way that sort of metamorphosed into an opera is kind of an interesting mystery to me. I actually would like to know how that happened.
Well, it took a couple years. There was a couple years of development. We worked together at the University of Chicago at the Gray Center and taught a class on dramaturgy related to the book and the various kinds of interpretations that the issues represented in the book could take on stage and in performance and movement. And George started writing, and we started, once he had a substantial amount of the opera composed, we held auditions, and then we got these great singers, Gwendolyn Brown and Julian Otis and Joel Lamar. And he basically composed the rest of the piece kind of with their voices in mind, and kind of with them as avatars and different ranges of their voices speaking to very different kinds of persona that are represented by the AACM. There's an interesting thing about the opera. I think that a lot of people miss is that there are all these quotes of classic jazz pieces in the music itself and in the lines and in the melodies. So it's in that sense it kind of reflects the way that maybe Ives used to work with creating all these little
kind of a pastiche thing, but not exactly sort of
like a collage
yeah.
sort of like echoes of different periods coming in.
Well, and that's a remarkable thing that's consistent with everything that we've actually been saying about several programs running throughout this festival, which is that we have, again, new music that is in conversation, in actual dialogue with old music, and that's a very rich and fulfilling thing. Now, one thing I couldn't quite hear every word of the talk that was done yesterday where all of the AACM exponents were there.
Yes.
But one of the things that I thought that I heard was that we shouldn't think of the characters as characters. They are basically avatars for real people, and all of the words that are coming out of them are words that were spoken by members of the AACM. Is that accurate?
Yes. For instance, the role that Gwendolyn Brown plays. I mean, she at various points evokes Muhal Richard Abrams, and another time she's some other kind of person, and so. And she changes gender during the opera as well. So she plays a lot of different perspectives, different kinds of ideas that represented the diversity and the polyphony of ideas and persona and kinds of creativity that are representative of the AACM.
And all three of the characters were all sort of composite or amalgams of a lot of different. Well, it was really remarkable to think about that because we have so many instances of sort of ripped from the headlines that they even had a term for it around the time that John Adams wrote Nixon in China. They were calling them CNN operas, which is such a kind of terrible and
I think there's some of that going on now too. Yeah.
But this is a very different thing because instead of reportage, it's kind of like yes, it is history, but it's also kind of a free fantasy in the way that it's assembled. And that was truly remarkable to me.
Well, it's holding true to the principles of the AACM and not codifying it into a certain kind of thing. The flow of energy and ideas that are present in the opera are reflective of the kind of dynamic creativity and self-interpretation and self-defining that they represent.
Absolutely. So. What were the particular challenges that you faced in conceptualizing a way to stage this thing?
It's very difficult because it travels through time. You have the entire Great Migration in like 5 minutes.
That's right.
So it's a very fictional and philosophical opera actually, and the music is very philosophical in relationship to the text.
Right.
And so there was a lot of different kinds of interpretation through movement and. Working with the great people that we had to develop the production, like Narda Alcorn is a production our stage manager, who's fantastic, and so there's a lot of creative generosity among all of the people involved, and with Ice and with the singers and with George.
Well, now I'm curious too about was the set and scenario was this that we saw last night on this stage consistent with the premiere? Has it stayed the same, or did you have to adapt a great deal?
We adapted a great deal. The full version actually has 3 dancers with it as well.
Okay.
And then there was a version that used discarded sets in a large sculptural collage form. So each production has been radically different, actually, employing many different kinds of theatrical conventions and different kinds of sets and different kinds of lighting, depending on what is available in the theater that we worked in.
So did you have any predecessors is not the right term, but was there any kind of example that you drew from that you said I can use this idea and sort of implant it? Was there a precedent? That's the word. I think
if there is a precedent, it may be something called itinerant theater or something where you can bring a show like this it's travelable, it's containable, and you can respond to the conditions that you're in wherever you find yourself. You can use whatever sets. You can use, it's not limited by time and interpretation because of the positive message of creativity and sort of finding ways to make things work. So So it's been a pleasure. Yeah, I would call it a kind of itinerant theater. It changes every time.
And tell me more about the work that you've done that sort of prepared you to take this on. Tell me more about your work.
I've been staging various kinds of intermedia operas with immersive video and different kinds of dancers and athletes. And this one is more really centered around the musical conventions that he came up with. There's the music is so aggressive that the entire world expands from the music itself. So you could even stage this with just a couple lights and a bare stage, and have the piece really still sing.
It really was just a remarkable conception, and as you said, just sort of the way that things sort of moved in time. Really just very imaginative and very true to the story of the AACM. So thank you so much for coming over to talk about
My
this.
pleasure.
And Thomas is going to come back now to talk a little bit more about this evening's concert.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So as I said before, we are going to hear a piece by Vijay Iyer, Radhe Radhe, Rites of Holi. Now, Holi, if you do not or are not familiar with it, it is a very sacred rite. It is a rite commemorating the romantic intersection of the goddess Radha and Lord Krishna. And as Vijay memorably said just a few days ago in one of the public Ojai talks, you've seen Holi. It's the MasterCard commercial where everybody's throwing colored powder at one another. So now you kind of have that image in your mind. So what's going on in the film is both that celebration and that colorful magic, but also a sort of subplot where Krishna and Radha are sort of engaged in finding one another.
Yes, and as you can probably see over our shoulder, they've erected this full screen here for the performance. It's going to be really, really exciting. And for me personally, I'm really excited to hear this piece in the context of just hearing Rite of Spring.
Right, exactly.
Because I know when I was doing my research on this piece and looking at all the promo videos of it, I was looking at it through this framework of Rite of Spring first, then this piece. And what does that mean? And how's our ears going to change?
Right, exactly. And then, one other thing. This was kind of funny when I spoke with Stephen Schick today. I asked him, Stephen Schick, the conductor, that is to say, just so you remember. I asked him what it was like to try to sync up the performance with the film and what he took away from the film in process. And he said, "Well, I'm a funny person to ask because I don't actually see the film. I have a click track in my ears and I'm staring at the score trying to keep everything synchronized." He said that he and the percussionists are working with a click track so that everything stays in sync with the film, but that nobody else is on a click track, so there is actually a kind of breathiness and a give and take, even though it's tightly synchronized. And that's just, what a fascinating prospect that is to witness.
Yes, and this performance, am I correct, that features Vijay on the piano as well?
Correct.
And I also be very curious to know about, how much of it is improvised and how much is left for decision making at the moment, especially for a set piece for film. And the film director, what was the name of the film director again?
Prashant Bhargava.
Right.
A very talented young filmmaker and a very good friend of Vijay's. He passed away tragically, very suddenly, just 2 years ago of a heart condition. I believe at the age of 42. It was seriously a loss that took everybody aback. And so tonight's performance of Radhe Radhe is actually devoted to Prashant Bhargava's memory. Just one reminder that after this concert is over, stay with us because there is a lot more to come tonight in tonight's late night concert. We have the Brentano Quartet coming back with The Art of Fugue and with a special performance, actually a very special arrangement of Amazing Grace that's going to start that off. More music by Vijay Iyer.
Time, place, action, and this is a piece where we talked about it before in this whole festival, the crossroads between improvised music and composed music. And Brentano backstage to me really expressed how much this piece pushes them beyond their comfort level. And these guys are the best. They are experts, and to know that it's going beyond their comfort level means a lot.
It's quite extraordinary. And again, 2 days ago in his public talk, Vijay was just talking about his deep admiration for the Brentanos. He said it was his favorite quartet. And so all of that coming later, as well as a premiere by Courtney Bryan. But right now, we are headed down to the stage for Radhe Radhe, Rites of Holi by Vijay Iyer at the Ojai Festivals. Thanks for joining us.
check. Hi. Hello. How are you guys? This is I can't even begin to describe what this feels like. Something between a family gathering and a rock concert and that TV show, This Is Your Life. Sort of all of those things at once. And this concert today is sold out, and beyond that, I think they had to, crowd a bunch of people onto the lawn, so you did that. This is my first chance to really get to address the audience, so I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart to all of you for being here. Thank you to the Ojai Festival for letting us, I don't know, how would you describe this? Letting us kind of populate and inhabit and bend and twist and expand into this format and hopefully bring you something that carries you somewhere meaningful. And I wanted to thank Tom Morris, who had the crazy idea to let me bring all my people with me into this place. And I suppose that if you've been to any of these concerts, you've already seen a tremendous spectrum of possibilities. What we're doing tonight is revealing another facet of it, which came about a few years ago. I guess it was in 2011 or 2012, we were approached by UNC Chapel Hill, Carolina Performing Arts. They were doing a series of commissions to commemorate the centenary of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, the riotous, supposedly riotous opening in 1913 in Paris. And so they commissioned a series of new works, somehow in dialogue with that piece from the past. And as soon as Emil Kang from Carolina Performing Arts approached me with that idea, the first thing I thought of was, well, I know about a rite of spring. It's called Holi. It's celebrated in India and also all over the world, and I'm sure you know about it, because it's that holiday where people get covered in colored powder. I'm not sure if you can see this, but it's one of those riotous and cathartic and exuberant and devotional festivals that was born in India. So I contacted my dear friend and colleague, the wonderful filmmaker, Prashant Bhargava. He was like a brother to me. That's his family. There's about 40 of them, I think. Yeah? Yeah, it's about 40. Including his parents, Vijay and Ranjana Bhargava, and his sister Anurima, and just about, yeah. So we had the great privilege of working together on this project, and we premiered it in 2013, on Holi, in fact, at UNC Chapel Hill. And then he rebuilt it a bit, and he inserted a sequence, a staged encounter between the Hindu god Krishna and the earthly, his consort, his lover, named Radha. So the title Radhe Radhe is a salutation to her. So I'm here to tell you that we're celebrating his life, Prashant's life. He passed away 2 years ago at the age of 42. And we think about him all the time. He changed all of our lives. And I want to share with you a little bit of who he was. So we're going to show you a little bit of him describing the project. Some of what you're going to see was recorded after the premiere performance, and you'll see that he was the trickster who brought the colored powder and hit everyone with it, including himself. So his entire head is magenta in this video. And you get to see the joy and exuberance in his life, the person that he was, the spirit that he was, and you can see how he touched all of us. So this is my man, Prashant Bhargava.
Flow of events, it's all real. And eventually we realized that everyone was saying Radhe, Radhe.
With the term Radhe, Radhe, you're always praising Radha. Whether you bump into someone, whether you enter the temple, whether you feel something divine, whether you want to share a moment of just happiness with someone, Radhe, Radhe. Radhe, Radhe.
And so I realized that the subject of this piece should be the goddess Radha. And Radha, for many people, is an old mistress who had an affair with a young Krishna and taught him a lot of sexual stuff, you know. But in that city, she's something else. She's a cosmic queen. She's the gateway to truly understand what devotion to Krishna is. And that became the subject of our piece.
As an artist, I want to bring that everyday magic, that intimacy that we share as people to the narratives of the gods. I think they exist within us. I think that push and pull that Radha and Krishna have exists within each one of us.
That's our man, Prashant. You saw that twinkle in his eye, and you also probably saw those pretty nice kicks that he had on, and he had given me a matching pair. That was the kind of guy he was. So we're, like I said, celebrating his life. But we're also just celebrating the fact that we're all here together. And this is really a magical weekend for all of us. I think I can say that without hesitation, that everyone here, performers and those of us who are gathered as listeners, are entering a new world here. And it's I hope that you can carry it forward. After tonight, of course, we have a late night concert and 3 more concerts tomorrow. Then I'll be out of your hair for a while. But I look forward to how all of this grows in the future. Thank you very much. Oh, one more thing I want to say. My dear friend Chirag Bhakta, of the a fantastic artist and graphic designer, his website is pardonmyhindi.com, and he created these art cards that are being distributed out there. I hope you'll track them down. They're very special, and they're made just for the occasion. So please seek them out, and there's some information on there, a special message for you. So please enjoy. Radhe, Radhe.
How absolutely extraordinary was that? I'm shaken up by the impact of hearing Vijay Iyer's Radhe Radhe Rites of Holi performed live by the International Contemporary Ensemble directed by Stephen Schick, with the film by Prashant Bhargava on a huge screen there or on monitors throughout the park. I mean, what an amazing, visceral, beautiful experience that was.
Oh my God, I mean, that, such a performance. I mean, Tyshawn Sorey at the end, just, I don't even know how to describe it, just, I'll say destroying those drums, and that was so, I'll say it, that was sick. That was just awesome. I mean, like...
To use a technical term.
Yeah, it was so cool. He's just going at it, and I mean, it was absolutely thrilling. And then, I don't know how much you could see from the stream, but the ensemble was so into it. By the time it got to the end, the whole group was just grooving. I mean, it was thrilling. I can't explain it.
I was grooving too. I mean, you hardly couldn't. Now, just getting the mundane stuff out of the way. I'm Steve Smith, the director of publications for National Sawdust in Brooklyn. With me is Thomas Kotcheff, a pianist and composer, and my co-host, companion, and guide throughout this my inaugural experience of hosting the live cast from the Ojai Festival in Ojai, California, where Vijay Iyer, the composer and pianist of the piece that we've just heard, is the music director and sort of setting the tone and the theme for the entire festival, which has just been a truly, truly extraordinary experience. And this particular piece, we talked about this beforehand because the piece was sort of written on a skeleton of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, and in fact, the composition and the film accompanying were a direct response to the centenary of the Rite of Spring, which we heard in a reduced size version before the intermission. And I mean, what did you think? Did you hear Stravinsky in that?
I think it's hard not to, because we just heard the Stravinsky before that started. But you know what I loved about it though is I felt the form of Stravinsky. I felt it there. Like when it started, I was, the adoration. It started, and I just loved that, and it was awesome. And I felt that Vijay was right there with the Stravinsky going with it. What I also loved about that whole piece was how just much it was Vijay and his music.
Right.
It was him. I mean,
it absolutely is.
It opened up with a piano solo, which I'm gonna say it was improvised. It sounded improvised.
Most likely.
And then there was some pretty clear moments in the piece where the ensemble was written out and Vijay and Tyshawn were doing their thing, where they were making music that was so perfect and so fitting and so in the moment that, I don't know, I'm taken aback by the whole thing. I mean, it's just so awesome.
That and to see all of this go down, I mean, you can probably see the audience slowly emptying behind our shoulders. The entire lawn was full. This was a well more than sold out audience tonight, and the extended standing ovation that greeted this performance was just one more sign of the times. I speaking for myself, I really could intuit certain kind of gestures of acknowledgement and kinship towards Stravinsky. I felt the contours, and I could sort of feel I could feel myself sort of moving through the piece, but yet it was kind of like a familiar route, but a really different journey, or vice versa, or something. It just really, really impressive, and the film so luxuriant, so beautiful,
stunning.
You know, if it brings back to us the greatness of the loss of Prashant Bhargava at the age of 42 just 2 years ago, very, very sudden and unexpected, of a heart condition. It also reminds us of how great his talent was and his magnanimity. And in fact, Vijay, in his comments before the concert, acknowledged that a great number of Bhargava's family members are here, which what a special thing for them to get to witness as well. The whole thing felt very much like a celebration, like a rite.
You know, and those comments that Vijay made before it started, just talking about the whole weekend and how almost this felt like a real culmination just now.
Right.
And that performance just was everything it was supposed to be. And I don't know, I'm so enthused by it. Like, it was so Vijay, and the music defied. And also defined a lot of things too.
That's right.
It defied any style or genre. It just was. And the film was beautiful, and the performance was just literally the best you can get in the whole world. I don't know. I don't know what to say about it, but it just was awesome.
And to have it paired actually with its role model, its sort of thematic model, the Rite of Spring. We heard the Rite of Spring before the intermission this evening, and it was in a dramatically reduced but very, very dynamic, very effective, lean, mean rendition arranged by Cliff Colnot, who is a very, very well-known for his ability to make these reduced orchestrations. In fact, I sort of glibly referred to him as the incredible shrinking man, but he is certainly incredible, and the thing is, the piece shrunk in forces, but not a bit in impact.